That is AFN National Chief Sean Atleo at the Idle No More protest on Parliament Hill today. Demonstrators took to the streets across Canada. The Idle No More movement began in November in response to the government's last omnibus budget bill, and it has been growing ever since. And now the protests are being fueled by Attawapiskat Chief Teresa Spence's hunger strike. Spence is demanding a meeting with the Prime Minister and the Governor-General. She says she is prepared to die for her people. How far is the government prepared to go to prevent that from happening? What does the wider protest say about the relationship between the government and First Nations? Joining me now is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Aboriginal Affairs Minister, Greg Rickford, NDP MP Paul Dewar, and Liberal Aboriginal Affairs critic Carolyn Bennett. Greg, let me start with you. I guess the most immediate issue now, clearly, is what do you do about Chief Spence? She's obviously weakening. She's obviously extremely determined. So the worst could happen if the government continues in its position that, no, the Prime Minister is not going to meet with her. What are you going to do?
We're going to stay positive. We have every reason to believe that we'll be able to resolve this situation. The Minister has reached out to her on a number of occasions, and we're hopeful that she'll take that opportunity to discuss this. When she started this campaign, obviously she was dealing with some community-specific issues that we have made progress in. We heard the member from Timmins James Bay acknowledge that. We're going to build on those successes, and we're hopeful that that situation will improve.
All right, but with respect, you're not answering the question directly, though, about Chief Spence's hunger strike and what's going to happen with her. Take a look, for example, yesterday, Sean Atleo, who we just saw, said on this broadcast that Chief Spence is prepared to die for her people. Take a look at what he had to say.
Well, make no mistake about her resolve. We do need to hear from the Prime Minister to respond to Chief Spence, who's in good spirits, but Evan, make no mistake, she's getting weak.
So the question does arise, doesn't it? I think it's a fair question. Is the government prepared to let Chief Spence die?
Well, some of the issues, of course, are national in scope, and we think it's appropriate that the National Chief, Sean Atleo, who we just saw, continue to have discussions with Minister Duncan, who's responsible for Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development. I can confirm that National Chief Atleo has spoken with senior officials in the Prime Minister's office today, in fact, and those discussions were focused on building around some of the shared and key priorities that came from the Crown First Nations gathering and meetings with the Prime Minister, the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development, and National Chief Atleo quite recently.
Well, let me turn to Paul Dewar next and ask you whether you think it's reasonable whether the government's position is reasonable not having a prime ministerial meeting with Chief Spence at this stage, or conversely, is it unreasonable to expect such a meeting? You know, almost holding a gun to the head of the Prime Minister, then it creates a precedent. What do you think?
Well, excuse me, I've been outside all day. One of the things that we note is that this is a symptom of the lack of respect from the government to First Nations. And what Chief Spence is doing is displaying that. And we think it's reasonable for the Prime Minister to meet with her.
There's no lack of respect. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there's no lack of respect in a process where last year, where we were dealing to a certain extent with the self-governance issue and the housing situation, we've taken steps. More than 60 homes have been rebuilt or replaced or moved in. We asked the community for a housing strategy. There have been communities in that area that I visited last week. We put an invitation out to meet
I do want to come back to
that. That didn't come.
I do want to come back to that. And I know you weren't interrupting your friend Paul Dewar.
And I appreciate
you were just giving him a chance to clear his throat.
Yeah, I was. But thank you for that.
But let's stay with that question.
Exactly. So when I saw Chief Spence the other day, she was very clear on what she wanted. I think very reasonable. And most Canadians would see it as very reasonable. She is someone who wants to speak to her Prime Minister because her people are still suffering. And it turns out she's not alone. What we saw today on Parliament Hill right across this country are particularly young people, but First Nations people saying, we're not going to sit back and as its saying goes, be idle anymore. And this has been a really interesting phenomenon. It's taken everyone by surprise, is that the grassroots are, basically rising up and saying, we want a dialogue based on respect. And I think, as someone said to me, if we can meet with, the Prime Minister can meet with Justin Bieber, why not be able to meet with Chief Spence? It's a reasonable thing. She's not asking for anything more but to talk.
Carolyn Bennett, do you think it's reasonable to, as it were, hold a gun to the head of the Prime Minister and demand a meeting or I die?
I mean, I don't think any of us really think that hunger strikes are a good idea in what we want to do. But Chief Spence has decided to do this, and the Prime Minister is the only person that can intervene. She's asked for a meeting, and I think he owes it to Chief Spence, but to all of us, to go and hear what she has to say. She wants a meeting with the Prime Minister, and she wants to come from that all the premiers, I mean, from resource sharing to all of the things that are on their issues. But
so you think the Prime Minister should say yes?
Yes, he's got to intervene.
Greg Rickford, I promised to come back to the questions that you wanted to talk about, what the government's doing, but it's against a very bleak background. Just let me just get a couple of numbers on the table, if I may. Some recent statistics from the First Nations Statistical Institute don't paint a very good picture, as you know. Take a look. 52% of First Nations adults are unemployed. 54% have less than a high school education. 44% of homes need major repairs. So it's a pretty terrible situation. Half of them are unemployed. Mm-hmm. Nearly half live in a home where the roof is falling in. Yeah. But you want to talk about how good how the government has been for First Nations?
Come on, Terry. Let's play this debate fairly. What we're suggesting, and I think we all have a responsibility as politicians and as media to talk about what government can and is doing. And in this case, when you quote statistics like this, I would say two things. First of all, if we're going to take something positive from this process, it's that we're willing partners, and we've demonstrated that with key infrastructure files, education, water and wastewater treatment. We've done national consultations in lockstep with the Assembly of First Nations. We understand that there are regional issues and community-specific issues around infrastructure. We're focused on the kind of legislation that integrates, hang on one second, that integrates those communities into economic development, protecting and balancing environmental protection, which is something the First Nations
I am going to have to challenge my friend on this, because one of the main
those are top priorities.
One of the main calls is from First Nations, as we fought against in the House of Commons, was the objection to the omnibus bill. And something very important for First Nations is a respectful relationship. On Bill C-45, which is we dealt with it on this program often, is the omnibus legislation, which is going to affect them because a lack of consultation now. Because
increase education funding to give administration capacity.
The talking points are over, Rick. Okay, we're talking about the meat of the issue.
Actually,
what the First Nations want, if I may, is a respectful relationship, which we get from the government as talking points. And it is about the fact that now, when we're talking about the development of waterways, etc., they're going to be shut out because of Bill C-45. They don't expect much more than to be consulted. And this has caught the government by surprise, because they thought it was all done once the House was done. Well, it turns out Canadians were listening. Turns out First Nations were listening, and they're going to have to pay attention.
Running short of time, I want to get Carolyn Bennett one more time on this question of is it going well or better?
It's going terribly. There must be free, prior, and informed consent. In dealing with First Nations, there was nothing on C-45 that said they changed their fishing rights to navigable waters. These people are desperate. I was in a homeless shelter on Tuesday afternoon. This man who was homeless a week ago asking me about the omnibus bill and their treaty rights. We had a full house at the Friendship Centre in North Bay. Each of them wanting to know all these bills and how they were not consulted on the bills. This is an appalling treatment. This is supposed to be nation to nation, and it's just raining down legislation, and these people are fed up, and that's why Theresa Spence has taken this drastic action.
Well, this won't be the last we'll hear about this. I want to thank you all. Thank you to Greg Rickford, Paul Dewar, and Carolyn Bennett.
Merry Christmas to
and
everybody.
All the best to you all for the holidays.
Yes,
thank you.
Thanks, Thank you.
We'll have more on this straight ahead on Power and Politics.